The envelope that ended my 11-year relationship did not contain a love letter, a hotel receipt, or a photograph. It contained an expedited physical therapy license bearing my fiancé's first and middle names, a current expiration date, and somebody else's last name. I signed for it at 10:12 on a Tuesday morning because the courier said it required an adult signature. Across the top, in blue state board lettering, it read, Mara Vale, PT, active through June 30th. Under Practice Location, it listed Harbor Ridge Rehabilitation in Bloomington. An enclosed credentialing cover sheet listed her role as clinical director. I knew the woman named on the certificate as Mara Ellis. I knew she had stopped treating patients 9 years earlier after a fall in her clinic left an older man with a fractured hip. I knew she now reviewed insurance claims from a laptop at our dining room table. And I knew the name Vale only because Mara had once told me it belonged to an ex-husband she divorced before we met. I stood in the front office of my print shop with the certificate in my hand while the cutter thumped behind the wall, and the first question that came to me was not whether she was having an affair. It was why an active state license, mailed to my shop, said she was still living inside a name she claimed she had left 12 years ago. My name is Owen Blake. I was 44 then, and I owned a commercial print shop on the south side of Indianapolis. Mara was 42. We had been together 11 years, engaged for 7, and living in the same narrow brick house for 9. We were not one of those couples who kept postponing a wedding because we could not agree on flowers. Mara said the legal end of her first marriage had been punishing. Every time we approached a courthouse date, she would become pale and quiet and ask for another year in which marriage could feel like a choice instead of a trap. I believed patience was part of loving someone well. We had a house in both names, a shared account for the mortgage and utilities, separate retirement plans, and a running joke that our engagement had lasted longer than most cable contracts. Her silver ring sat on her right hand because, she said, the left still felt loaded with history. She spent most Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays reviewing claim files at home. On alternating Tuesdays and Thursdays, she drove to Bloomington to help her Aunt June, who had arthritis and did not like strangers in the house. Twice a month she stayed overnight. I had met June once, early in our relationship, at a crowded family lunch where Mara introduced me as the man who finally taught me to stop apologizing. June had squeezed my hand and said, "Take care of each other." After that, Mara said June's health and pride made visits complicated. I never pushed. The cover sheet showed that Mara herself had requested expedited delivery to Blake Commercial Print 3 weeks earlier, using a clinic note that said its mailroom was under renovation. She managed Harbor Ridge's print orders, so our front staff normally set client parcels beside her proofs. This one required a signature, and I happened to reach the counter first. That made an accidental old record less likely, but it still gave me a reason to wait for her instead of inventing the rest before lunch. I put the envelope in my desk drawer, finished a rush order for a plumbing supplier, and spent the afternoon hearing Mara's ordinary voice in my head. Want me to pick up coffee? The porch light is flickering again. June had a rough morning, so I may stay. Nothing about those sentences sounded theatrical after the fact. That was the first frightening thing. At 6:15, Mara came through the back door carrying Thai food and complaining about construction on State Road 37. She kissed my cheek, took 2 plates from the cabinet, and asked why I was staring at her. I laid the certificate on the kitchen island. The change in her was small but complete. Her shoulders stopped moving before her face did. Then she gave a short laugh and said, "That is unbelievably annoying." "Which part?" I asked. "The name. The board never fixes anything." She set the containers down carefully. "Vale was my married name. You know that. I know you said it was your married name. I didn't know you were using it now." "I'm not using it. It's attached to the original license." I pointed to the current practice location. "Harbor Ridge. I consult for them sometimes. You told me you had not treated a patient since the fall." "Consulting is not treating. Clinical director sounds bigger than consulting." She pressed 2 fingers against her forehead. "Owen, I didn't tell you because the work is temporary and because you know what that part of my life does to me. I review protocols. I fill in when somebody is out. It is not a second career. Her answer contained enough truth-shaped pieces that I could feel myself reaching for them. She did review claims. She did dread talking about the accident. She did go to Bloomington. Why does the board have my shop address? Because they needed a reliable mailing address. Why not the clinic? Because things disappear at the clinic. Then I asked the only question that made her look away. Does Daniel Vale work there? Mara's ex-husband had a first name, though she rarely used it. She had described Daniel as a charming, exhausting man who turned every disagreement into a courtroom. She said they married young, separated after 4 years, and spent another year untangling debt. She had shown me no photographs, but I had never thought that strange. Some people did not keep souvenirs from a fire. He founded Harbor Ridge, she said. That is why the old name stays useful there. Patients knew me under it. You work with him. Not with him. Around him. Does he know about me? Of course he knows about you. The speed of that answer was almost reassuring. Then she added, he knows I have a life in Indianapolis. Not that he knew my name. Not that he knew we were engaged. A life. I asked to see the consulting agreement. Mara said it was in her work account and that she did not bring clinic material home because of patient privacy. I asked whether she was being paid. She said yes, into her personal account, and reminded me that we had always kept some money separate. That was true. I asked how often she worked there. She said 2 or 3 days a month. I reminded her she was in Bloomington 6 days most months. She said June took most of that time. When I asked why she had let me believe the trips were only about June, she snapped, because I knew you would hear his name and make it about him. Then she began to cry, not loudly, and told me I was proving why she had been afraid. In 11 years, Mara had never accused me of jealousy. The accusation felt less like memory than a tool she had just picked up. I did not demand her phone. I did not follow her. I did not call the clinic pretending to be a patient. I told her the certificate had created a problem that explanation alone could not close and that I needed documents showing the divorce, the work arrangement, and the income affecting a house we owned together. She stared at me as if I had asked for a blood sample. You want my divorce decree on the kitchen counter? I want to know whether the name on that license belongs to your past or your present. She slept in the guest room. The next morning she left before 7 with an overnight bag and texted that June had fallen. At 9, I checked the state licensing site from my office computer. It was a public search anyone could use. Mara Vale's license was active, with no disciplinary history. Harbor Ridge was not a temporary practice location. It had been listed for 8 years. The clinic's own website showed a staff page updated 4 months earlier. Mara's photograph was there beside the words clinical director and co-founder. Her biography said she had returned to hands-on practice after a brief family sabbatical, and had helped build Harbor Ridge's neurological recovery program. At the bottom was a photograph from a charity walk. Mara stood in a Navy clinic shirt beside a tall gray-haired man identified as founder Daniel Vale. His hand rested at the center of her back. The caption did not call them husband and wife. The next photograph did. It was from the County Hospital Foundation Gala 18 months earlier, Daniel and Mara Vale, longtime partners in rehabilitation and in life. I read the phrase 3 times. Then I noticed Mara's left hand. The same silver ring she wore on her right hand in our kitchen was on her left. Before I could decide what, in life, legally meant, my shop phone rang. A woman said, Mr. Blake. My name is Teresa Long. I manage operations at Harbor Ridge. I believe a state certificate meant for Mara Vale was delivered to your business address. It was, I said. Why did she use my shop? There was a pause. I'm sorry. Mara told us that address belonged to her brother's company. I looked through the glass wall at the press operator loading paper and felt the floor of my ordinary life shift half an inch. I'm not her brother, I said. I'm her fiancé. Teresa did not answer for several seconds. Then she said, very quietly, you need to speak with Daniel. I did not speak with Daniel that day. I first spoke with a lawyer named Priya Shah, who had handled the purchase agreement when Mara and I bought our house. I told her I was not asking whether Mara had committed a crime or whether I could lock her out. I wanted to know what I had a right to protect while I figured out whether the person on my deed had a legal husband and a professional identity I had never seen. Priya checked the county marriage index and Indiana's statewide civil docket while I sat across from her. The county record showed a 2007 marriage between Daniel Thomas Vale and Mara Louise Ellis. The civil docket showed no Indiana dissolution under either combination of names. Priya warned that an absent Indiana case did not rule out a divorce filed elsewhere, it only meant Mara's explanation still required an actual decree. I sent Mara one text: I have verified that Harbor Ridge lists you as co-founder and that public event material presents Daniel as your partner in life. I will not access your devices or follow you. I need your divorce decree, your work agreement, and a truthful explanation before we discuss our future. Priya is advising me about the house. Please communicate in writing about when you are returning. Mara called 9 times. I answered the 10th. She began with anger. You hired a lawyer before you gave me 1 day. I called a lawyer because our house is in both names and you will not tell me whether you are married. Daniel and I have been separated emotionally for years. That is not what I asked. The paperwork is complicated. Are you legally married to him? She went silent. I heard a turn signal clicking in the background. On paper, she said. Does he believe the marriage is over? He understands what we are. Does he know my name? I am not doing this while you interrogate me. Then answer one question. Does Daniel know you have lived with me for 9 years? She ended the call. At 4 that afternoon, an email arrived from Daniel Vale's clinic address. The subject line said, "Request for a private conversation." The body was 4 sentences. Teresa had told him what I said. He was not asking me to prove anything by email, and he would not share patient or employee records. He wanted to know whether I had lived with Mara Ellis continuously since 2015. If I had, then, in his words, we have both been given materially false versions of the same years. Priya said I could answer factual questions about my own life. I wrote back that Mara and I had begun dating in October 2014, moved in together in March 2016, became engaged in May 2018, and purchased our house together in 2017. I attached no private photographs. Daniel replied with one fact: he and Mara had never separated, filed for divorce, or agreed to a non-exclusive marriage. He asked whether we could meet with another person present. We chose a conference room at Priya's office 2 days later. Daniel arrived with his sister, Rebecca, because he did not trust himself to remember the conversation accurately. Seeing him frightened rather than triumphant removed the easiest shape from my anger. She said you were controlling, I told him. He closed his eyes. She said you were her half-brother. He knew my shop. He had seen invoices from Blake Commercial Print for clinic folders, discharge binders, and event banners. Mara had told him I inherited the company from our father and gave her a family rate. In reality, Mara had brought Harbor Ridge to my shop as a client 8 years earlier, saying a former colleague needed dependable printing. She handled the account herself. The clinic paid standard rates, and the money went to my business. There was no financial fraud in that piece. The lie was more deliberate because it had not needed theft. Every invoice with my name had become proof, in Daniel's world, that I was exactly who Mara said I was. Daniel showed me a photograph, then asked before sliding it across the table. It showed him and Mara at a backyard table with his mother and Rebecca. The date printed on the back was Thanksgiving 2022. Mara wore the cream sweater I had bought her the week before. She had left our house at 8 that morning carrying 2 pies and saying June was embarrassed to attend a large gathering. At 6 that evening, she had sent me a photograph of an old woman asleep under a quilt. Daniel recognized the room in that photograph as his mother's guest room. The old woman was his mother, not June. He had been in the kitchen when Mara took it. She told me she was sending it to a physical therapist friend who wanted to see the position of Mom's shoulder, he said. The detail was so mundane that it became harder to dismiss than a kiss. Mara had not created 2 sets of events. She had stood inside one event and described it differently to each man. We compared calendars only where we each had a right to share our own schedules. Her Bloomington nights matched Harbor Ridge board meetings, Daniel's family dinners, clinic fundraisers, and weekends at the condominium Daniel had owned before their marriage. That condominium was not a secret second property she had financed, it was his long-standing home. Our Indianapolis house was the second household from Daniel's point of view. He believed Mara's family sabbatical meant she spent 3 days a week in Indianapolis helping manage her brother's shop and recovering from burnout. He believed she slept in a small apartment above my business when deadlines ran late. There was no apartment above the shop. There was only paper storage and an old binding machine. I asked about the patient fall. Daniel's expression changed. A patient had fallen in 2016, but Mara was not treating him. She was the administrator who reviewed the incident. No one blamed her, and she did not leave clinical practice because of trauma. She reduced her schedule because Harbor Ridge was struggling financially, then rebuilt it 2 years later. The story I had treated as the most vulnerable part of her history was constructed around a real man's injury, so I would feel cruel whenever I asked her to return to work. Daniel, meanwhile, had been told that Mara's reluctance to attend events with him came from panic attacks triggered by clinic gossip. Each of us had spent years protecting a wound that did not exist in the form she described. Rebecca asked whether Mara had ever talked about marriage with me. I told them about 7 years of postponements. Daniel pushed the cup away. In 2018, the month Mara accepted my proposal, she and Daniel took a 10-day trip to Maine for their 11th anniversary. She had told me the claims company sent her to a compliance workshop in Boston. The dates matched. I remembered dropping her at the airport, kissing her under the departure sign, and laughing because her suitcase was too large for a 4-day workshop. She said she packed choices when she was nervous. Daniel said she had worn her wedding ring throughout the trip. That was the moment my first theory collapsed. Until then, some part of me had tried to arrange the facts into a marriage that existed only for business and an emotional life Mara had chosen with me. The anniversary trip made that impossible. She had not failed to leave Daniel. She had maintained him. She had not failed to marry me because paperwork frightened her. She could not marry me because she was already married. The ring moving from one hand to the other was not symbolism. It was equipment. Daniel had brought 3 items he was willing to share: a copy of their marriage certificate, the first page of their most recent jointly filed tax return with all financial numbers and identification digits covered, and a clinic succession plan signed 6 months earlier. The tax return confirmed a continuing legal marriage and shared filing. The succession plan was more personal. Daniel intended to step back from daily work at 55. Mara would become managing director and buy additional ownership over 5 years. Their cover letter described the transition as the next chapter we have built toward together. At our house, Mara and I had spent the previous winter discussing a different next chapter. She wanted me to sell the print shop at 50, she said, so we could travel while she worked remotely. I had turned down an offer from a regional chain because the price was low, but I had also stopped expanding, partly because I believed we were preparing to leave. Daniel had delayed hiring an outside director because he believed Mara was preparing to come back full-time. 2 men, 2 futures, both narrowed to preserve her options. Before we left, Daniel said, "I need you to know I am not going to compete with you over which life was real." I looked at the ring mark on his left hand. Neither am I. It was the first decision we made together, and it removed Mara's safest defense before she knew we had met. Mara returned to the Indianapolis house on Sunday at noon. By then, Daniel had notified the clinic's attorney and the other owner. Under an existing control policy, they suspended Mara's individual purchasing credentials and required 2 approvals for non-routine spending while an outside accountant reviewed the books. I had moved my business payroll to an account Mara had never been authorized to use and changed the passwords on the shop systems that belonged solely to me. I had not touched our joint mortgage account except to download statements, and I had not packed her belongings. Priya had made the distinction clear: discovering a lie did not grant me powers the deed did not. Mara walked into the kitchen, saw Priya's business card beside the state certificate, and said, "You are making this much bigger than it is." I asked her to sit down. She remained standing. Daniel and I have a legal arrangement, she said. The clinic depends on appearances. His mother is fragile. We agreed not to disrupt things. Daniel says there is no arrangement. That stopped her. You spoke to him? Yes. Her face emptied. He is angry. He will say anything right now. He showed me your joint tax filing. That does not describe our marriage. He showed me the succession plan. That is business. He showed me Thanksgiving at his mother's house. He told me about Maine. Mara gripped the back of a chair. For several seconds, the only sound was the refrigerator compressor. Then she sat and said, "You two had no right to compare me like property. We compared the facts each of us had been given about our own lives. You do not understand Daniel. He needs a story where he is the abandoned husband. He believed I was your brother." Mara looked toward the back door. I watched her calculate whether denial still had somewhere to go. "I was going to tell both of you," she said. "When?" "After the transition." "Which transition? His clinic plan or my shop sale?" Her mouth tightened. "You make everything sound cold when you put it that way. You had a 5-year plan with him while you were asking me to sell my business." I had written 7 questions because Priya warned me that a person with 11 years of explanations could keep me talking until the facts blurred. I asked when the relationship with me became romantic. October 2014, she admitted. I asked whether Daniel ever consented to it. No. I asked whether she had represented herself to him as continuously married. Practically, yes. I asked whether she had ever filed for divorce. No. I asked whether June needed the care Mara described. Mara stared at the table. June had moved to Arizona in 2017 and died in 2020. Mara had attended a small memorial without telling me. "You used a dead woman as your schedule for 6 years, I said. She flinched. I used a pattern that already existed because changing it would have raised questions. It was the first fully honest sentence she gave me, and it was terrible. I asked whether she had been physically involved with Daniel during the years she was with me. She tried, not every time I was there. I asked again. She said yes. Neither man had been told there was another partner, and her answer turned the deception into a health decision she had made for both of us. I asked the last question, "When you asked me not to expand the shop because we were going to travel, did you already intend to run Harbor Ridge full-time?" I did not know what I intended. That is not an answer. I was trying to keep options open. I put my pen down because there was nothing ambiguous left to write. She began to cry then, and unlike the first night, the tears did not move me toward explanation. They moved me toward grief. She said she had married Daniel at 24 and become whoever his family and the clinic needed. When she met me, she felt like herself for the first time. She planned to leave him, but Harbor Ridge almost failed, his father became sick, and then Daniel's mother needed help. Every delay made the truth more destructive. She said the house with me was the only place she could breathe. I asked whether breathing required calling me her brother to the people who trusted her. She said, that started as shorthand. I asked whether the engagement was shorthand too. No. I loved you. You accepted a proposal you legally could not honor. I thought I would be free by the time it mattered. It mattered when you said yes. She covered her face. For a moment, I saw the woman who sat with me through my father's last hospital night, who learned how to clear a paper jam because I had the flu, who could make a cashier feel interesting in 30 seconds. Those things had happened. The fact that they were real did not make the structure around them honest. Mara tried another explanation. She said Daniel cared more about the clinic than the marriage and would have accepted a quiet separation if I had not forced him into humiliation. I told her Daniel had not asked me to leave her, expose her, or help him save the clinic. He had asked for facts. He is performing dignity, she said. And you are rewarding him because he looks injured in a suit. That was when I understood why she had kept us separate so effectively. She did not merely tell different stories. She gave each man a moral weakness that made contacting the other seem shameful. Daniel was controlling, litigious, and fragile. I was jealous, literal, and unable to understand trauma. To question her was to become the villain already written for us. I am not deciding whether Daniel is a good husband, I said. I am deciding whether I consented to this relationship. I did not. Mara asked if I was ending 11 years in one afternoon. I said the relationship had not ended in one afternoon, my ability to choose it had been removed year by year. I told her I wanted a written plan for temporary use of the house within 48 hours and that Priya would send a proposal. Until then, I would sleep at my sister's apartment because I did not want a battle over occupancy. Mara looked surprised that I was the one leaving. So I stay here while you punish me through lawyers? You stay because your name is on the deed. That is not forgiveness, and it is not punishment. It is ownership. Before I left, she asked if Daniel and I planned to report her to the licensing board. I said personal betrayal was not automatically a licensing violation, and I would not invent one. Daniel had hired a CPA to review clinic money and would address any real discrepancy through the proper process. Her relief lasted only a second, because restraint gave her nothing dramatic to fight. Months later, formal disclosure showed no stolen patient funds and no secret fortune. Mara had used part of her legitimate clinic income for Indianapolis while Daniel covered her insurance and Bloomington costs. Each household had subsidized time she withheld from the other. Harbor Ridge's payments to my shop were market rate, so my employees had not unknowingly joined the lie. The attorneys delivered the same unwelcome answer: betrayal did not erase Mara's genuine clinic ownership or her equity in our house. Emotional clarity would not make the finances simple. Mara moved into a short-term rental after 3 weeks, once we signed a temporary agreement about the mortgage, utilities, access, and repairs. I returned home. Daniel filed for divorce. Daniel and I limited further contact to dates our lawyers needed. Cooperation had been necessary, but friendship would have kept Mara's deception at the center of both our lives. Mara asked for couples counseling, and I agreed to 3 sessions devoted only to closure and property communication, not reconciliation. In the second session, the counselor asked Mara what she believed would have happened if the certificate had gone to the clinic as usual. Mara said she would have completed the succession plan, helped Daniel retire, and then found a compassionate way to separate. I asked what she would have done with me during those 5 years. She looked at the floor. I thought you would keep running the shop, she said. That answer hurt more than a confession of passion. She had asked me to make my future smaller, but in the private version she expected, I would simply remain available until her other life reached a convenient stopping point. At the 3rd session, I said I would not return. Mara accused me of refusing to recognize growth. The counselor asked what growth she meant. Mara could not answer without describing a future in which both men continued absorbing the cost of her delay. I left knowing the central question was closed. She had not chosen Daniel over me or me over Daniel. She had chosen the interval in which she did not have to choose. The practical ending took 11 months. The morning after the confrontation, I scheduled a full screening with my doctor. Daniel later told me he had done the same. Both sets of results were clear, but the appointments belonged among the consequences. Luck did not restore the consent Mara had withheld. Our house was appraised twice because Mara rejected the first number, then I rejected the second after an inspector found water damage behind the upstairs shower. I wanted to buy her share, but the shop's uneven seasonal income made the first loan offer expensive. Selling would have been simpler on paper and worse in reality. The building was 6 minutes from my work, my father had helped me rebuild the porch, and I could afford it if I stopped treating speed as proof of freedom. I expanded the shop instead. A hospital network offered a 3-year contract for patient folders and wayfinding materials, work I had once been too cautious to pursue because Mara and I were supposedly preparing to travel. I hired a production supervisor, documented processes I had kept in my head, and qualified for a better loan 6 months later. The buyout did not leave Mara ruined. She received her verified share after the mortgage balance, repair credits, and closing costs. I kept the house and more debt than I wanted. That was a consequence, not a victory pose. Daniel's divorce took longer because the clinic valuation, retirement accounts, and 18-year marriage required patient work. Harbor Ridge continued operating. Daniel stepped away from direct management for 3 months, then returned with an interim administrator. Mara remained a licensed physical therapist and minority owner while the ownership dispute proceeded. She did not lose her profession because 2 men learned the truth. Claire wanted the licensing board to punish Mara, but I understood its job was patient safety, not moral certification. No official sanction could make my decision more valid, and the lack of one did not make the betrayal smaller. I had to leave because the facts removed consent, not because an institution handed me a verdict. Daniel and I met one last time at a coffee shop near the halfway point between Indianapolis and Bloomington. He looked older and less frightened. He said the divorce disclosures had shown him that Mara's relationship with me began earlier than she first admitted but later than he feared. There were still weekends neither of us could explain. He had decided not to reconstruct all of them. I thought knowing the full calendar would give me my life back, he said. It just gave her more appointments in it. I knew what he meant. For months, I had been able to look at any date and ask which hand wore the ring. Eventually the question stopped producing useful truth. We closed the gaps that affected health, money, property, and consent. The rest belonged to the category of facts that could increase detail without changing the decision. Daniel told me he planned to sell part of his clinic interest to 2 senior therapists rather than hand the entire operation to one person. I told him I had kept the house. We did not congratulate each other. Survival was not a contest, and neither of us wanted to turn restraint into nobility. Before we left, Daniel said, I keep trying to decide whether every good day was fake. I do that too, I said. He looked down at his coffee. And I thought about Mara sitting beside my father's hospital bed and about the Thanksgiving photograph on Priya's table. A real day doesn't excuse the lie around it. Daniel nodded once. We left separately, without trying to turn shared damage into a friendship. Mara contacted me after the house transfer was recorded. Her message was shorter than the others. She said she had moved into a 1-bedroom apartment, was working 4 days a week, and had started individual therapy. She wrote, I know an update is not an apology. I am trying to stop arranging my life around the moment before consequences arrive. I read it twice and waited 3 days before responding. I hope you continue. Please keep future contact to unresolved property documents. I archived the exchange with the closing papers and did not answer the next message, which contained no question I was responsible for solving. I made mistakes during the first months. I checked Harbor Ridge's public website too often. I drove to Bloomington once for no purpose I could defend and parked across from the clinic. I did not wait for Mara or follow anyone, but sitting there made me feel as if investigation had become a habit looking for work. The building was smaller than I imagined, a beige medical office between a credit union and a pet supply store. Patients came out carrying exercise bands. An employee rolled a bin to the curb. Nothing about it looked like the grander, more authentic world I had pictured. It was a workplace. Our brick house was a house. Daniel's condominium was a condominium. Mara had supplied the theater by controlling what each place meant to each person. I started the car and left before anyone could recognize me. Back in Indianapolis, I told my therapist what I had done. She asked what I hoped to see. I said, proof that her other life was more real. And if it looked ordinary? Then I would have to admit ordinary was enough. That became the hardest correction. Mara had not needed a mansion, a secret child, or a dramatic new identity to construct another life. She needed calendars that did not touch, people trained not to ask, and 2 men willing to interpret absence as care. The scale came from duration and coordination, not spectacle. At home, I moved her old desk out of the dining room and turned the space into a long table where I reviewed proofs with the production supervisor on Friday mornings. For years, that room had been the stage for her claims review job. Learning that the job was mostly invented made the room feel contaminated. Using it for work whose invoices, clients, and mistakes were visible restored it without ceremony. The first June after the certificate arrived, a duplicate renewal notice from the state board came to the house. Mail forwarding should have caught it, but the board system was slow. This time it was addressed to Mara Vale without the clinic title. I did not open it. I wrote, "Not at this address," across the front and put it back in the mailbox. The gesture lasted 10 seconds. I did not photograph it or check whether the board changed the record. Correcting her professional identity was not my job. Correcting the role I had been assigned was. A week later, Claire came over for dinner. She saw the new table, the hospital signage samples stacked at one end, and the bare patch on the wall where our engagement photograph had hung. "Does it feel like your house now?" she asked. I told her ownership papers could answer that question, but feelings were slower. After she left, I found the engagement photograph in a box. Mara and I were standing beside the canal downtown. Her left hand was hidden behind my jacket, which I had once thought was an accident of pose. I considered throwing the picture away, then returned it to the box. I no longer needed every image to testify. The photograph proved we stood there. It did not prove what she had promised Daniel that afternoon or where she placed the ring afterward. It also did not decide what I would do next. 18 months after the courier came to my shop, I took a Friday off and drove north instead of south. There was no clinic, no anniversary route, and no house connected to Mara at the end of the trip. I went to a state park my father used to love and walked until the noise of traffic disappeared. At an overlook, I noticed a pale band on my right hand where I had worn my engagement ring long after Mara moved out. I had kept it there partly from habit and partly because removing it felt like admitting I had been the only person who did not understand its meaning. I slid it off and put it in my pocket. The truth was simpler. I had understood the promise exactly as she gave it to me. She was the one who had changed its meaning from room to room. For 11 years, Mara had made Daniel believe I was her brother and made me believe Daniel was her past. Neither man was the other life. We were two real people living inside separate stories she kept from meeting. When the stories finally touched, they did not destroy each other. They exposed the person moving between them. I walked back to my car without feeling triumphant. For the first time, I knew where I stood. There was one life behind me that I had not knowingly chosen, and one ahead that did not require somebody else's translation.